والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد، فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه. صدق الله العظيم. وقال الله تبارك وتعالى في شأن حبيب الكريم: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. الصلاة والسلام عليك سيدي يا رسول الله صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم. After praising Allah, the most glorified, the most supreme, the one through whose will a small seed is able to grow into a large tree, and after praising the most glorified of all creation, the best of all creation, the jewel of mankind, the nur of the universe, Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wasallam, I'd like to extend my greetings to those that gathered here today by saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So we've spoken about the three khulafa, and now we come to the final out of the first four khulafa, Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. He has many titles, many titles. You know, we know Asadullah, the Lion of Allah. I mean, he was granted this title, the Lion of Allah. He's also, you know, we know him as Babul Ilm, the gate to the city of knowledge. Okay, Sayyidina Ali. He's also given the title Abu Turab. Abu Turab means father of dust or father of sand. And we'll come to why he was given this title later on. But for now, in terms of introduction, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu is one of the most knowledgeable companions. He was one of the most just, in terms of justice, Adl. He was one of the most just, one of the most courageous and one of the most brave. He's one of the most strongest companions as well. And we'll come to a few stories about his strength as well later on. He was the father of Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, radiallahu ta'ala anhuma. It was through his nurturing that we have, you know, the legacy that happened in Karbala today. If it wasn't for Sayyidina Ali, the events of Karbala would not take place. So through Sayyidina Ali that we have Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein that we have today. And he is also the beloved husband of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra radiallahu anha. So he was very blessed, very privileged, that not only was he the son-in-law of Rasul, not only was he the cousin of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he was also the son-in-law of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well. He is the husband of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra radiallahu anha. So he also possessed some light. And we mentioned Sayyidina Uthman was Dhun Nurayn, the possessor of two lights. Sayyidina Ali was possessor of one light. He had one light, which was Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra radiallahu anha. Now we move on to his acceptance of Islam. How did Sayyidina Ali accept Islam? We know that he was one of the first people to accept Islam. There are some historians that say he was the first person out of everybody. But Imam Azam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, he puts in a very beautiful way. He divides into three categories. He said the first category is in terms of women. The first woman to accept Islam was Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu anha, the first wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The first man, the first matured man to accept Islam was Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. He said the first child, the first young man to accept Islam, the first child to accept Islam was none other than Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. So this Imam Azam, he divided into three categories, and the debates that are going on, he defeated those debates by dividing into three categories. So now nobody needs to argue that this person was first, this person was first. We have the three categories now. So Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, out of the youngest, out of the children, he was not the first to accept Islam. And his story is like this. He, being the cousin of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would witness Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He would see him pray salah, he would see him pray namaz. And one day he asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "What are you doing? What are you doing over here?" And then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him the message of Islam. He told him that I am the messenger of Allah. I am the final messenger. I have come with the message that Allah is one, and that Islam is the true religion. And I ask you to come and accept this Islam as well. Accept this religion. Now Sayyidina Ali, at this time, he was only 8 or 10 years old. Between the ages of 8 and 10, so he's very young. Now for a child who's 8 or 10 years old, for him to make a decision like this is a very big decision. It's a very big choice for him to accept Islam. Because they were all set in the ways of their forefathers. The religion that they had before, everybody was set in that religion, the idols that they had. So Sayyidina Ali said, let me ask my father, Abu Talib, let me ask him. And at this stage, remember, Islam was at its very beginning period. Islam literally had just begun. So Sayyidina Rasulullah told Sayyidina Ali, you either accept it now, but if you don't want to accept it, that is fine, but just don't tell anybody. Don't tell your father. Don't tell anybody that I brought this message. So he said, okay, let me go home. And from that point onwards, inclination was in his heart. He was thinking that, I want to accept Islam, I want to accept Islam. And he thought to himself that the next opportunity I see Rasulullah I'll accept Islam. And the very next morning, he went to Rasulullah and he accepted Islam in his hands. So he accepted Islam as one of the first youngsters, one of the first children to accept Islam was Sayyidina Ali, radiallahu anhu, and he became one of the first 3 people to accept Islam altogether. So this was, how from the get-go he was a Muslim essentially. From the first few years of his life, he was a Muslim. And we know of his birth, that he was born in the Kaaba. His birth was very blessed as well. So he's born into the Kaaba, and he's also the son-in-law of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now if you move on, during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it got to a critical point in Makkah al-Mukarramah, where the Quraysh were attacking the Sahaba, they were prosecuting the Sahaba. The Sahaba were being attacked, they were being tortured. So it got to the point where he decided we need to move to Madinah Munawwara. So we need to make a migration towards Madinah Munawwara, the Hijrah. Before the Hijrah took place, the Quraysh, they made a plan to assassinate Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his own home. Whilst he was sleeping at night, they made a plan to assassinate him. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he became aware of this plan, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him of this plan. And when he became known of this plan, he told Sayyidina Ali that, oh Ali, I have a duty for you now. This night I will be leaving for Madinah Munawwara with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. But you must stay here in my home, and you must stay in my bed. And in my bed, he's got a red shawl, the shawl of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You wrap yourself in this shawl and you sleep in this bed tonight. Sayyidina Ali knew that they were going to be the Quraysh that were going to attack the house. He knew that there were going to be people about to kill Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they would all assume, they would all think that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be in that bed. So Sayyidina Ali knew this, he knew the dangers of this. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him something very special. He said to him, after this night, all the stuff that I have, so what would happen was, during that time, the Quraysh, even though they were enemies with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they still knew he was very, very trustworthy. Even though they were enemies with him, they knew that he's very trustworthy. So they would still leave their stuff with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They would leave their valuable belongings with the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and tell him to look after it. Even though they were enemies, they still tell him to look after it. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told Sayyidina Ali, in the morning when you wake up, all these things which belong to the Quraysh, you give it back to them. Finish your duties here, and you meet me in Quba Masjid in Madinah Munawwara. Sayyidina Ali said, there's no issue with this. And he knew that people were trying to murder Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that night in this bed. So he knew that by sleeping in this bed, he'll be targeted. He'll be on the number 1 list. They wouldn't know that he's Sayyidina Ali in the bed. They would think that it's Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the bed, because they don't know that he's left. They don't know that he's gone to Madinah Munawwara. But Sayyidina Ali and his yaqeen was such, his trust was such in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that if he has said, in the morning I will wake up, then I will definitely wake up. And if he said I will distribute the things tomorrow, then I will definitely distribute the things tomorrow. And if I will meet Rasulullah in Madinah Munawwara, then I will definitely meet Rasulullah in Madinah Munawwara. There is no other option. There is no other choice. If he says that I'm going to live, then I'm going to live. This was his yaqeen with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said so, then it will happen. But we have people today who say the complete opposite. They say if Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says something, it's a prediction. Or it might happen, it may not happen, it might happen. Or when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says a benefit about something, they don't fully believe in this benefit. For example, the miswak. The miswak, if you use to clean your teeth, it's mentioned in hadith, it strengthens the memory, it strengthens the memory, and it strengthens the eyesight as well. But how many of us truly believe in this? That's the thing for us to say. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us that if you use the miswak, it will strengthen your memory. If you use the miswak, it will strengthen your eyesight. But how many of us actually believe in this? We should look at Sayyidina Ali. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him that you are going to live tomorrow, you are going to do all these things tomorrow, and he had firm belief that I am going to do this tomorrow. And he also mentioned that night, when he slept in the bed of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, this is the best sleep I've ever had. The best sleep, that I slept so peacefully this night, with so much peace, so much tranquility. This is the best sleep I had. Why? Because it was the bed of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Not only was he using the same bed, but the same shawl, the same blanket. He used the same blanket of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well. I said, this is the best sleep I ever had. This is the barakah and the blessing of anything that belongs to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Anything that touches Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is full of blessings, full of barakah. So Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, he mentioned that after this night, I survived, I woke up in the morning like nothing happened. Best sleep I've ever had. I distributed the belongings of the Quraysh. And I did this with courage. I did it without hiding. Because they knew that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had gone now. And they thought that Sayyidina Ali may have had something to do in this. But he did it with open because he knew that they can't do anything to me now. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told me that I'm going to be in Madinah Munawwara. So no matter what I do now, I'm still going to end up in Madinah Munawwara. So with open chest, he did whatever he needed to do, did all his duties, and he left for Madinah Munawwara. And he met Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Madinah Munawwara, in Masjid Quba, as he said. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whatever he said, had been done. This is the saying of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that whatever he said will happen. Whatever he says will happen. If he doesn't say something, then it won't happen. But if he does say something without a doubt, it will always happen. It's the benefit and the blessing of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his power, the qudra that he's been given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now when he arrived in Madinah Munawwara, those who have studied the seerah, you will know that the Muhajirun, those who migrated from Makkah to Mukarramah to Madinah Munawwara, so those who were residents of Makkah, they were called Muhajirun, and they migrated to Madinah Munawwara. And the residents of Medina, they were called the Ansar. The companions of Madinah Munawwara, they were called the Ansar. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the seerah it is mentioned that because the Muhajirun had left everything in Makkah to Mukarramah, they had nothing in Medina. But the Ansar were well established. They had homes, they had families, they had wealth, they had businesses. So what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did is he enjoined one Ansar with another Muhajir. So he made them brothers. So that you are not the brother of this person, you are not the brother of this person, you are not the brother of this person. So this way they will share their homes, they will share their business, they will share their wealth. And so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he eventually assigned every single Ansar, every single Muhajir with a brother. So everybody had a brother. And now Sayyidina Ali, he came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asking, with tears in his eyes, that you've assigned every Muhajir, every migrator with a brother in the Ansar. Would you not assign me with a brother? And then this is where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, Ya Ali, anta akhi fi dunya wal akhirah. That you are my brother in this dunya and you are my brother in the hereafter as well. This is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said about Sayyidina Ali. That you are my brother in this dunya, in this world, and you are my brother in the hereafter as well. So this is Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. So from this point onwards, he was assigned the brotherhood with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was the son-in-law, he was the brother, and he was the cousin of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He has so many rights, so many ties with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's just amazing to think. And he was the father of Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, radiallahu anhuma. So this was Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. We mentioned at the beginning that he's one of the strongest of the companions. And a way to display this, the Battle of Khaybar. So the Battle of Khaybar was when the Jews, they had a lot of fortresses. And these fortresses, these palaces or these forts, they're very strengthened. It's very difficult to get inside. And the Muslims, they went on a campaign to attack these places and to destroy the Jews and to allow them to come back to Islam. Now these fortresses were very, very solid. You couldn't break inside. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for each campaign, he had a flag. And he firstly gave this flag to Sayyidina Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu was given the flag. He went, but he came back unsuccessful. Then he gave the flag to Sayyidina Umar. Sayyidina Umar was one of the greatest fighters of Islam. A very, very strong companion. Yet he still was unable to be successful. And this campaign, the Sahaba, they were camping for a few days, but nothing was happening for these few days. And after these few days, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam announced that tomorrow morning, I'm going to give the flag to somebody. And the person who I give this flag to, they will conquer Khaybar. They will conquer this palace, or they will conquer this fort. Now throughout the whole night, every single Sahabi that was there, they all wished that it was going to be me. They all wished that, I wish it was going to be me. Because they know that the people of today, they're not the people today that think if Rasulullah says something, then maybe it will happen. They knew for sure that if Rasulullah said that whoever gives a flag in the morning, that 100% without a doubt they will come to Khaybar. So every single Sahabi was wishing that it's going to be me. Every single Sahabi thought it's going to be me tomorrow. And then in the morning, Rasulullah gathered their companions. He gave the flag to none other than the Shaykh al-Khuda, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. He gave it to him. And we know that Sayyidina Ali, he was very successful in this campaign, to the extent that the Sahaba mentioned, and some of the narrators, they mentioned as well, that the fort had a gate. And this gate, Sayyidina Ali just broke it with his hands. And he used this gate as a shield. He used the gate of Khaybar as a shield. And later on the narrators, they mentioned that later on we tried to lift this gate. We tried to lift this gate and 40 men, 40 people could not lift this gate. They couldn't even move it. 40 people. So Sayyidina Ali, radiallahu anhu, with just one hand, it's mentioned in this narrative that he used the shield with one hand. The whole gate he used with one hand as a shield, and the other hand he was using his sword. So with one hand he was lifting what 40 men could not. This was Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu and his strength. Now if we move on to the title Abu Turab. Now the title Abu Turab was given whenever somebody would mention, or whenever somebody would call to Sayyidina Ali, they would mention Abu Turab. Because whenever they mention Abu Turab, this was a name given by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if you mention Sayyidina Ali by the name Abu Turab, he become very happy. Because this was the name given to him by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The reason why he was given this name was because one day he was lying in the masjid. And he was lying in such a way that sand and dust began to gather on top of him. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to him and said, "Qum ya Aba Turab." Stand or rise, O father of the dust, O father of the sand. And he patted, Rasulullah himself patted the clothes of Sayyidina Ali, cleaned him and allowed him to stand. And from this point onwards, whenever somebody called Sayyidina Ali Abu Turab, he become very, very pleased, he become very, very happy. So this was the title Abu Turab. Until today, people do refer to Sayyidina Ali as Abu Turab. You can find in a hadith, you can find in narrations, Abu Turab he's been referred to many, many times. Now we go on to his Khilafat, inshallah. We mentioned, his time before the Khilafat. Now we go towards his Khilafat. One point I want to raise before we go direct to his Khilafat is that Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, many people object and they say that he was forced away from his Khilafat. They say that he was meant to be the first Khalifa. This is an objection that people raise. But in my opinion, I think that those people who say that he was meant to be the first Khalifa and that he was stripped away from this, they are very, very disrespectful towards Sayyidina Ali. Now I'll come to my reason why. The Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu was given the first Khilafah, then Sayyidina Umar, then Sayyidina Uthman. And we find in many narrations that Sayyidina Ali was present in these gatherings and he accepted that Sayyidina Uthman and Sayyidina Umar should be the next Khalifa. He wasn't there when Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was elected, but he accepted it during his life. Now if somebody was to say that he was stripped away from his Khilafah, meaning if he was supposed to be a Khalifa, but for whatever reason he allowed it to happen, then I think they're being very disrespectful. Because Sayyidina Ali, we know is Shaykh al-Khuda. We know he's the lion of Allah. One of the strongest companions that ever exist. One of the most just people to ever exist. Do you not think that for once he would actually even say a single word? You will never find a narration where he said anything that, I was meant to be the Khalifa instead. You never find this. He accepted that Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was meant to be first. Then Sayyidina Umar. Then he in fact signed the paper and stamped it that Sayyidina Uthman should be the next Khalifa. And when Sayyidina Uthman was martyred, he wasn't happy. We mentioned yesterday, he wasn't happy, he was very, very angry. He was so angry to the extent that he slapped Sayyidina Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein. He wasn't pleased when Sayyidina Uthman was martyred. He was extremely angry. So those who say that he was meant to be the first Khalifa and he was stripped away from him, they are the biggest lies that you'll find. Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, his Khilafah was meant to be the fourth. And this was the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was not stolen from him. Nobody took it from him. So Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, when he became the Khalifa, after Sayyidina Uthman was martyred, there's obviously a lot of riots going on at that time. People were in unrest, they were not happy. The Khalifa had just been martyred. So Sayyidina Ali, when he became the Khalifa, he was in a very troubling time, very testing time. It was a time where a lot of the Muslims, there were a lot of hypocrites as well amongst them, a lot of munafiqs amongst them. So Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, because this was in the Madinah Munawwara, he decided to move the Khilafat and the capital of Islam from Medina to Kufa. He moved the capital from Medina to Munawwara to Kufa. And his Khilafat lasted 4 years. The reason why he moved from Madinah Munawwara to Kufa was because he wanted to avoid more trouble in Madinah Munawwara. It was the blessed city of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah is resting there, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is resting there, Uthman and Umar is resting there as well. So Sayyidina Ali wanted to move away from the city, just to avoid more trials and more tribulation in the city. He wanted to avoid more bloodshed in the city. So he moved towards Kufa. And in the city of Kufa, there were two battles that took place. And I won't mention the details of this battle, but very briefly. Sayyidina Zubair and Sayyidina Talha, radiallahu anhuma, there's a battle that took place called the Battle of Jamal, the Battle of the Camels. And this battle was between Sayyidina Ali and a few of the other Sahaba Kiram over a few issues between themselves. And in this battle, 30,000 people became martyred. And those who survived, they returned back towards where they came from, and Sayyidina Ali returned back to Kufa. And then eventually another battle took place. And this battle, a lot of the people, they bring a lot of bad narration about this battle. The Battle of Siffin. The Battle of Siffin between Sayyidina Ali and Amir Muawiyah radiallahu anhuma. Again, this was a dispute amongst themselves. It's not something that we need to talk about. Sayyidina Amir Muawiyah radiallahu anhu was also a companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's also Sahabi. He is also Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Same with Sayyidina Ali. They are both Sahaba. So we cannot say that Amir Muawiyah, was a baghi. People say that he was a rebel. They use this bad term against him. Astaghfirullah. This should never be used against any Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The slogan we say, Har Sahabi Nabi, Jannati Jannati. So Sayyidina Amir Muawiyah radiallahu anhu was also a Sahabi. So he will also enter the Jannah for those. Whatever happened between him and Sayyidina Ali is between them. They still had love for each other. They still loved each other. They weren't enemies. People wrongly accused them of being enemies. They weren't enemies. They had a small dispute amongst each other and this battle took place. But in reality, they still loved each other. For example, nowadays, you and your friend, you may have an argument. But this argument doesn't mean that you don't love each other. You still have that friendship, you still have that love. But in that moment, you may have had that sort of anger between yourselves. Otherwise, you still love each other and the next thing you come back towards each other. Same thing between a husband and his wife. That you may have an argument, you may have a fight, but still afterwards, you still love each other. So Sayyidina Ali and Sayyidina Amir Muawiyah, they were still companions, they were still friends. They didn't hate each other. So these two battles took place during the time of Sayyidina Ali. And then afterwards, after these two battles, he returned back to Kufa. And when he returned back to Kufa after these two battles, a new group emerged. A group called the Khawarij. Okay, the Khawarij, literally their name means those who have left. From the word Kharaja Yakhruju. Those who have studied Sarf, Kharaja Yakhruju, that bab. So the Khawarij are those who have exited, those who have left. That's literally what the name means. And these Khawarij, they had hatred towards Sayyidina Ali. They wanted to rebel against Sayyidina Ali and they tried to remove him from his Khilafat. They said that he was wrongly appointed and they wanted to remove him. So Sayyidina Ali, he appointed Sayyidina Ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhu, the son of Sayyidina Abbas and the cousin of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sayyidina Ibn Abbas. He was appointed with a small group to go and deal with this Khawarij. Because the Khawarij, they left Kufa and they went to another city. They began to pillage the city. They began to attack the city. So Sayyidina Ibn Abbas went and he began to fight them and he slaughtered a few of them to ruin in order to destroy them and to bring peace. And then a few of them, the Khawarij was an ideology, it wasn't a group. So this ideology remained, and there's a few in Makkah to Mukarramah. And a few in Makkah to Mukarramah, they made a plan. And this plan was to assassinate Sayyidina Ali. There was three of them. Abdul Rahman ibn Muljim, Barq ibn Abdullah, and Amr ibn Bukair. These three individuals from the Khawarij, they wanted to destroy and they wanted to assassinate Sayyidina Ali, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So in Makkah to Mukarramah, they made a plan, and the three, they went their separate ways. And they all traveled towards Kufa using separate routes. They traveled separately so that if one of them was attacked on the way, the other two would still survive. And eventually, Abdul Rahman ibn Muljim, he ended up in Kufa. And on the night of the 17th of Ramadan, they all gathered in Kufa, him and a few of the Khawarij, and he told the Khawarij that my plan is to now assassinate Sayyidina Ali. This was his plan, and he wanted to assassinate Sayyidina Ali, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And so in the next morning, at the time of Fajr, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, he's with Imam Hassan. And he told Imam Hassan that he had a dream that he was with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the night before he was attacked, he had a dream with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he gave him glad tidings. And then the azan for Fajr was given. So Sayyidina Ali, he had to lead the salah. So he went towards the masjid. On his way towards the masjid, he was attacked by the same person, Abdul Rahman ibn Muljim. He was attacked by him and he was given many slices and he was given many wounds. And to the extent that he was bleeding a lot. Now Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, imagine, he was very old at this point, he was about 63 years old. He suffered many blows to his chest, to his back, arms, legs. The Khawarij were very ruthless. And there's a huge crowd that gathered as well, and they also began to attack Sayyidina Ali. These Quraysh, they had hatred towards Sayyidina Ali and they wanted this to happen. And then, Sayyidina Ali, you know what he was doing just before he went to the masjid? He didn't just go direct towards the masjid. He began knocking on people's doors, saying, wake up for Fajr, wake up for Fajr, wake up for Fajr. It's such a great action that he was doing just before he was attacked. And then he was attacked by the Khawarij. And then Sayyidina Imam Hassan, he also came later on. And when he saw his father in his sick, he began to cry. Tears began to fill his eyes. And Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, he gave a bit of advice, he gave a few pieces of advice to his son, Sayyidina Imam Hussein. And I want to mention some of the advice they had given. It would benefit us as well, inshallah. The first advice they gave was that, oh my son, Imam Hassan radiallahu anhu, first and foremost, the best type of strength, the best strength that you have is the best wealth that you have is strength. The best wealth, the best mal that you have is strength. And then he says that that there's no greater bankruptcy than stupidity. Meaning, you know that you're bankrupt, you know you have nothing left. When you have lost your senses, you become stupid, essentially. And they say there's no estrangement, meaning to be unknown by the people, than vanity. And the final thing is mentioned that the best characteristic, the best thing you can have is generosity, being generous to the people. And Sayyidina Ali was very generous during his lifetime as well. And Imam Hassan radiallahu anhu, he said, oh my father, do you have any more advice? Do you have any more advice for us? And then he says, I'm trying to find it right now. So he says that firstly, he gives 4 more pieces of advice. But at this point, remember, Sayyidina Ali he had wounds, he was there in the street, bleeding out. And at this point, he was still giving advice to Sayyidina Imam Hassan radiallahu anhu. Says firstly, you should refrain from being friends with a gullible person. And a gullible person is somebody who accepts everything. If you tell him something, he instantly accepts it. If somebody was to lie to him, he also instantly accepts it as well. So Sayyidina Ali said you should refrain from being friends with a gullible person, because even when he desires to benefit a person, he will harm him. You should also protect yourself from being friends with a liar, because a liar will make distant those things which are close, and those things which are close he'll make distant. And then he says that you should also keep away from that person who is stingy, that person who is conjuice, that person who is a miser, because this person will only deprive you of good things in your life. And finally, you should stay away from a person who has no morals, an immoral person, somebody who has no haya, somebody who has no modesty. You should also refrain from that person, because he will be able to sell you for even the smallest price. These were the advice of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu to his son Imam Hassan. And this piece of advice, these 8 things that he's given, till today we should also take into consideration. That do not befriend a liar, do not befriend a gullible, a stupid person, do not befriend a miser, a conjuice, and do not befriend that person who is a miser. The other one was the one who is a liar. Sorry, these 4 things. You should prevent yourself from these 4 people. Now, a behayai person, a person who's got no modesty. These 4 people, sorry. So Sayyidina Ali, this was his advice to his son. And then over the next few days, this was the 7th of Ramadan. And the next few days, he didn't die straight away. He was in this pain for a few days. On the 21st of Ramadan, this was the day when he passed away. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So the 21st of Ramadan, Sayyidina Ali was granted martyrdom in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Imam Hassan, after this, he became the Khalifa. He took the hold of Khalifa. And then he also took out action in order to ensure that those who killed Imam Ali, Sayyidina Ali, Karamallahu ta'ala wajhul kareem, he ensured that these people would be killed. So he killed Abdul Rahman ibn Muljim, and he ensured that the Khawarij, they were put down. Because the Khawarij was a new fitna that was arising. And this Khawarij that was there, we still have it today. The Khawarij, those who hate the Ahlul Bayt, they are known as the Khawarij today. Some mention the Salafi movement that we have, they originated from the Khawarij movement. So the Khawarij movement, they began, and eventually in the around 1200 in terms of Hijri calendar, 1200 Hijri calendar, that's when the Salafi movement came about as we know it today. So the Khawarij was the initial point. And now eventually, before we end up, I mentioned two karamat, or two miracles of Sayyidina Ali, inshallah. The first one was his knowledge, very vast knowledge, to the extent that he was given the knowledge of the unseen as well. And there were two mothers that came to Sayyidina Ali. And one of them has a baby, the other one doesn't have a baby. And they were both complaining. One of them said, this is my baby, the other one said, no, this is my baby. She has stolen it from me, and the other one said, she has stolen it from me. And they brought this case to Sayyidina Ali. And Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, he was a very, very wise person. He said, okay. He brought her an axe, a sword, okay, an axe. And with this axe, he said, I'm going to kill this baby now. Okay, this baby should die now. This is what Sayyidina Ali said. Now one of the mothers said to Sayyidina Ali, oh Ali, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, let the other woman take it. I cannot bear to see my baby being killed in front of me. So then Sayyidina Ali took that baby and he gave it to that lady. And he said that you are indeed the mother. And the other, you should be ashamed of yourself for stealing somebody else's baby. This was the wisdom of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, because a mother would never like to see her son or daughter being hurt. So when he took this action, the true mother spoke out. And she said that I'd rather be separated from my baby, but I don't want to see him hurt. This was Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. And our beautiful story that I saw today. Now we'll end on this inshallah. That the people, this is back when he's in Kufa, and there's a Euphrates river. The Euphrates, a very famous river, the Euphrates river. This river the river level began to rise a lot. It began to rise to the extent that the crops around it began to become damaged. People's crops and animals began to be damaged. So they arise this to Sayyidina Ali saying, oh Ali, this is our issue. Oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, this is the issue. So Sayyidina Ali, he went into his home. And people gathered outside, they were waiting what's going to happen. He came outside of his home wearing the blessed imama of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the blessed robe of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the asa and the staff of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So these three things, imagine the scene. Imagine how beautiful this would look. The people who saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they would know that this belongs to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You see nur shining from it. Sayyidina Ali came out, he came out with Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein as well. So nur ala nur, light upon light. He's wearing the blessed clothing of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the blessed staff of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the blessed imam of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He came out wearing this. He mounted his camel with Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein on his side, and he went towards the river. He went towards the river, and many people began to follow him. So many people, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, they all began to follow Sayyidina Amir al-Mu'mineen, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. They began to follow him towards the river. And Sayyidina Ali, he pointed the staff towards the river. And the river went down a bit. And he asked the people, is this enough? He didn't say that's all I can be saying, is this enough? And they say, if a bit more could be done, it'd be better. He pointed the staff to the river and he went down even more. And he asked, is this enough? I said, if you could do a bit more, then it'd be even better. He pointed the staff again and he went down, and he went down about 3 feet. The water level decreased by 3 feet. And they said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, this is enough. This is enough. So this is Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. That scene as well, very, very beautiful scene. I wish I could see something like that as well. Especially seeing Sayyidina Ali with the clothing of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein by his side. Very beautiful scene to see. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept what has been said today. May He forgive any mistakes or errors I have made in my speech. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a tawfiq and ability to act upon the Quran and Sunnah. Wa ma'alina bil balagh al mubin. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Jazakallah khair for listening.